Gary Mitchell stood on the observation deck of the Starship Endeavour, looking at the bright stars and colorful gas clouds outside. His hand rested on his katana sword, a special family treasure that had been passed down through many generations. As the best swordsman from Earth, he had been chosen to represent all humans in the upcoming Galactic Federation trials. The ship hummed quietly around him as he practiced his breathing exercises. For 15 years, he had trained daily, mastering techniques that few others could even attempt. Now, facing aliens who had been perfecting combat arts for thousands of years, he wondered if human skill could truly compete. "They're waiting for you in the diplomatic chamber," said Lieutenant Olivia Reed, walking up beside him. She wore the blue uniform of the Earth Space Forces with perfect precision. "The Zarkonian ambassador has arrived." Gary nodded, his face serious. "What do we know about their dueling style?" "Not much," Olivia admitted. "They've dominated the art for over 3,000 years. Their champion, Selfar, has never lost a match. Not even once." Gary turned from the stars to face her. "And what happens if I lose?" "Earth's application to join the Galactic Federation will be delayed by 50 years, she said quietly. "We'll be left out of trade routes, technology exchanges, and protection agreements." "No pressure then," Gary said with a small smile. They walked together through the curved corridors of the Endeavour. Crew members stopped and watched as Gary passed. Some nodded respectfully, others looked worried. "The captain wanted me to remind you that you can still back out," Olivia said. "We could claim a diplomatic exception." Gary shook his head and confirmed what half the galaxy already thinks: that humans are too weak to face real challenges. He adjusted the simple black uniform he wore. "We need to show them who we really are." The diplomatic chamber doors slid open, revealing a large room with a circular table. Captain Frank Wilson stood at attention, flanked by 2 security officers. Across from them waited the alien delegation. Ambassador Drelvex of the Zarkonian Empire was nearly 7 feet tall. His skin had scales that changed colors like oil on water. 4 arms were folded across his chest, and his face featured 4 eyes that blinked in strange patterns. Behind the ambassador stood an even more impressive figure. Zelfar, the Empire's champion, towered over everyone in the room. Each of his 4 muscular arms bore ceremonial markings, tiny scars that Gary realized represented victories. There were hundreds of them. "Captain Wilson," the ambassador spoke, his voice surprisingly musical. "We appreciate your hospitality. The Federation Council awaits our report on this evaluation." Captain Wilson nodded. "Ambassador, may I present Earth's champion, Gary Mitchell." The room fell silent as Gary stepped forward and bowed deeply, showing proper respect. Zelfar's upper eyes narrowed while the lower pair scanned Gary from head to toe. Then came a strange clicking sound from his throat. Laughter. "This is humanity's offering," Zelfar asked, all 4 arms spreading wide in mock surprise. "So small, so fragile, with only 2 arms. Perhaps we should reconsider the terms of admission." Several of the Zarkonian aides made the same clicking sound. Gary remained silent, his face calm despite the mockery. "The terms have been agreed upon," Captain Wilson said firmly. "The duel will take place in 7 days at the Kal Shivar Arena." Zelfar leaned down until his face was level with Gary's. 7 days to prepare. "Will that be enough time for you to withdraw honorably, little human?" "It would be kinder." Gary looked directly into the alien's 4 eyes. "I look forward to our match," he said simply. "May it bring honor to both our peoples." The alien champion straightened up, clearly surprised by Gary's confidence. "As you wish. We shall see what honor looks like when your blood stains the sacred floor." Gary spent the hours after the meeting in his private quarters, studying recordings of Zarkonian dueling matches. The viewing screen displayed various angles of Selfar defeating opponents from across the galaxy. Each match ended quickly, with the 4-armed champion using different blades in each hand, attacking from multiple angles simultaneously. "Computer, replay the match against the Centauri champion." Gary instructed. The screen showed a muscular blue-skinned alien wielding a curved energy blade. Despite the centaur's impressive speed, Selfar simply overwhelmed him with a flurry of strikes from all four arms. The match lasted only 37 seconds. A soft knock at the door interrupted Gary's studies. "Enter," he called. The door slid open to reveal an elderly man with white hair tied in a neat ponytail. Master Hiroshi, Gary's lifelong teacher, had arrived from Earth just hours ago. "I see you're examining your opponent," Hiroshi said, walking slowly into the room. "What have you learned?" Gary gestured at the screen. "He's incredibly fast, uses all four arms in different attack patterns, and seems to anticipate his opponent's moves before they make them." Hiroshi nodded and sat cross-legged on the floor, his movements fluid despite his 83 years. "And what is his weakness?" Gary frowned. "I haven't seen one yet." "Then you are not looking correctly," Hiroshi said calmly. "Every strength contains the seed of weakness. Every style has its blind spots." The next morning, Gary and Hiroshi converted one of the ship's cargo bays into a training area. They placed practice mats on the floor and set up several training dummies. The Zarkonian believes his four arms give him an unbeatable advantage. Hiroshi explained as Gary warmed up. He has never faced the discipline of Earth's sword arts. Remember, true mastery lies not in the number of limbs, but in harmony between mind, body, and blade. For hours, Gary repeated basic movements, focusing on perfect form rather than flashy techniques. When crew members passed by the open cargo bay doors, many seemed disappointed to see Earth's champion practicing such simple strikes. During the afternoon, a small crowd gathered to watch. Among them stood Selfar, his four arms crossed over his chest, his scales shifting to a darkish purple color. "You train with such primitive methods," the alien champion remarked loudly. "No neural enhancers, no gravitational adjustments. How quaint." Gary lowered his sword and bowed to his visitor. "Would you care to demonstrate your techniques? Perhaps we could learn from each other." Selfar stepped forward onto the practice mat. His four arms unsheathed blades of glowing energy. "Our ways have been perfected across 12 star systems over thousands of years. What could I possibly learn from watching yours?" Without waiting for a response, Selfar began a dazzling display. His four arms moved independently, creating a deadly light show as the energy blades cut through the air. The watching crew members gasped in amazement. When he finished, Selfar turned to Gary with an expectant look. "Your turn, human." Gary nodded and took a deep breath. Instead of a flashy demonstration, he performed a simple kata, focusing on his breathing and precise foot placement. His movements were slow, deliberate, and without any wasted energy. Zelfar's clicking laughter filled the cargo bay. "Is this all? You move like a child taking first lessons." Master Hiroshi stepped forward. "Sometimes the greatest wisdom lies in returning to basics." "Wisdom will not save him in the arena," Selfar replied. "Perhaps you should teach him to dodge instead. It might keep him alive for an extra minute." As the alien champion left, Lieutenant Olivia approached Gary. "Don't let him get to you. He's just trying to shake your confidence." Gary sheathed his sword. "Actually, he just showed me exactly what I needed to see." "What do you mean?" Olivia asked. "He needs an audience," Gary said quietly. "Every movement is designed to impress, not to win efficiently. That's something we can use." The Endeavor continued its journey toward the dueling grounds at Kalshivar, a sacred neutral space where the Federation held its most important ceremonies. In the 5 days since Selfar's visit to the cargo bay, Gary had increased his training to 16 hours daily. Again, instructed Master Hiroshi, as Gary moved through a complex series of defensive positions. Gary's muscles burned with fatigue. Sweat poured down his face and soaked through his training clothes. His hands, raw from gripping the sword hour after hour, stung with each movement. Still, he repeated the kata without complaint. The Zarkonian relies on overwhelming his opponents. Hiroshi said. He attacks from multiple angles, expecting to find an opening. But what happens when there is no opening? Gary completed the movement and resumed his starting position. He would have to create one. Exactly. And in trying to force an opening, he will create one himself. Hiroshi nodded toward the corner where Dr. Alan Foster monitored Gary's physical condition. His reaction time has improved significantly, Dr. Foster reported, studying the data on his tablet. Neural response is 20% faster than last week. Heart rate remains steady even under extreme exertion. Gary took a short water break, drinking slowly while Master Hiroshi adjusted one of the training dummies. This one had been specially modified with 4 mechanical arms that could move at various speeds. You will face these attacks blindfolded now, Hiroshi announced, holding up a black cloth. Gary hesitated for only a moment before nodding. He tied the blindfold securely and took his position. Begin, Hiroshi commanded, activating the training dummy. The mechanical arms whirred to life, each one swinging padded weapons at different heights and angles. Gary stood motionless, listening intently. Just as the first strike approached, he shifted slightly, letting the padded club pass harmlessly by his shoulder. For several minutes, Gary dodged and deflected the attacks without striking back. His movements became increasingly precise, using the minimum effort required to avoid each blow. Enough, Hiroshi finally said, stopping the machine. What did you feel? Gary removed his blindfold. Patterns. Even with 4 arms moving independently, there are still patterns. Later that evening, Gary sat in the ship's mess hall, quietly eating his dinner alone. Most crew members kept their distance, respecting his need for concentration before the upcoming duel. He was surprised when Captain Wilson sat down across from him. How are the preparations going? The captain asked. As well as can be expected, Gary replied. Master Hiroshi believes I'm ready. Captain Wilson nodded. I wanted you to know that regardless of the outcome, you've already made Earth proud. Standing up to the challenge was courage enough. I appreciate that, sir, but I don't plan on losing. The captain's eyebrows raised. You sound confident. Not confident, prepared. Gary put down his fork. The Zarkonians have dominated dueling for so long that they've become predictable. They expect everyone to fight the same way they do. And you won't. I can't. I don't have 4 arms, Gary said with a small smile. So I'll fight like a human. The next morning, Gary was surprised to find Excelfar in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. The alien champion turned as Gary entered. Your people seem very concerned about your well-being, Selfar said. 3 different crew members warned me not to disturb your preparations today. Gary stood beside the tall alien. They're protective. They should be concerned. Tomorrow will not end well for you. Zelfar's scales shifted to a deep blue. Though I find myself curious about something. What's that? Why do you continue when defeat is certain? Is it pride? Honor? Or do you truly believe you can win? Gary considered the question carefully. If I believed defeat was certain, I wouldn't be here. Every battle has unknowns, even for champions with 3,000 years of tradition behind them. Zelfar studied Gary with all 4 eyes. Interesting. Most species beg for mercy by now. He turned to leave, then paused. Rest well, human. Tomorrow will test us both. Gary awoke early on the day of the duel. The ship's lights were still dim to simulate night as he dressed in traditional clothing from Earth, simple black akama pants, and a white gi top. He tied his dark hair back in a neat ponytail, then knelt before the small altar he had set up in his quarters. On the altar sat a single white candle, a photograph of his family back on Earth, and his grandfather's worn leather sword case. Gary lit the candle and bowed his head, breathing deeply for several minutes. He did not pray for victory. Instead, he focused on finding clarity and purpose. A soft chime indicated someone at his door. Enter, he called. Master Hiroshi stepped into the room, already dressed in formal clothing for the ceremony. He nodded approvingly at Gary's preparation. "The ship will reach HFY in 1 hour," the old teacher said. "How do you feel?" "Calm," Gary replied honestly. "Clearer than I felt in years." Hiroshi sat across from his student. "I have watched you grow from a stubborn child into a master swordsman. Today, you will face your greatest test not just as a warrior, but as a representative of humanity." "I understand the responsibility," Gary said, reaching for the sword case. "Do you?" Hiroshi asked. "The Zarkonians value victory above all else. But what does humanity value most?" Gary thought for a moment as he carefully unwrapped his katana. The blade caught the candlelight, revealing the complex folding patterns in the steel. Understanding. Growth. The journey rather than the destination. Hiroshi smiled. "Remember that when you step into the arena." The observation deck had been cleared of all personnel except Captain Wilson, Lieutenant Olivia, and Dr. Foster. Through the large windows, Gary could see their destination, HFY. It wasn't a planet, but a massive ancient structure, a ring-shaped arena that orbited between twin suns. The golden light from both stars made the structure glow like a halo in space. "It's beautiful," Gary said quietly. "And older than most civilizations in the Federation," Captain Wilson added. "The dueling grounds were built by a species that disappeared over 50,000 years ago. Some say they advanced beyond physical form." Lieutenant Olivia approached with a small communication device. "The Federation Arbiter has made contact. They're sending a shuttle to bring you to the preparation chambers." Gary nodded, then turned to face his small support team. "Thank you all for your help these past weeks." "Just come back in one piece," Dr. Foster said, offering his hand. "I've got too much data invested in you to start over with someone new." Everyone laughed, breaking the tension that had been building. The shuttle ride to HFY was brief but impressive. As they approached, Gary could see the true scale of the ancient arena. Miles of curved architecture formed a perfect circle, with seating for thousands of spectators. Force fields contained atmosphere in specific sections, while leaving others open to space, creating a breathtaking view. A Federation official, a tall being with translucent skin, met Gary at the docking bay. "Earth Champion Gary Mitchell, I am Arbiter Velena. I will escort you to your preparation chamber." They walked through arched hallways of a material that resembled marble, but glowed slightly from within. The walls were carved with scenes of ancient duels between species Gary had never seen before. "How many Earth champions have competed here?" Gary asked as they walked. "You are the first," the Arbiter replied. "Your species is new to our attention." They arrived at a circular room with a simple bench and water fountain. Through a small window, Gary could see part of the arena and the gathering spectators, beings of all shapes and sizes taking their seats. "The ceremony begins in 1 hour," Arbiter Velma said. "May your performance bring honor to your people." As the door closed behind the Arbiter, Gary removed his sword from its case and began his final preparations, listening to the growing murmur of the crowd beyond the walls. Gary sat cross-legged on the floor of the preparation chamber, eyes closed, sword resting across his knees. The sounds from the arena grew louder as more spectators arrived. He could hear the murmur of dozens of different languages, the clicking and whistling of non-human communication, and occasional announcements in the common Federation tongue. A soft knock at the door broke his meditation. Master Hiroshi entered, followed by Captain Wilson and Lieutenant Olivia. "It's time," Hiroshi said quietly. "The Federation Council representatives have arrived. The ceremony will begin soon." Gary opened his eyes and stood in one smooth motion. "How many people are out there?" "Thousands," Captain Wilson replied. "Representatives from over 50 species. This duel has attracted more attention than the Federation expected." "They're curious about humans," Olivia added. "Most have never seen one of us before." Gary nodded and secured his katana at his waist. The weight of the sword felt reassuring, like an old friend. "Any last advice?" he asked, looking at his teacher. Master Hiroshi straightened Gary's collar. Remember your training. Remember who you are. And most importantly, remember why you are here. To represent Earth, Gary said. No, Hiroshi corrected. To show the galaxy what humanity truly is. The door opened again, and Arbiter Velna entered. It is time, Earth Champion. Your opponent awaits. Gary bowed deeply to Master Hiroshi, then followed the Arbiter through a long curved hallway. The sound of the crowd grew louder with each step. Finally, they reached a set of massive doors carved with intricate symbols. These doors will open onto the arena floor, Velna explained. When the ancestral tone sounds, you will enter. Proceed to the center circle and wait for the formal introductions. Gary took a deep breath and nodded. The Arbiter left through a side door, leaving him alone before the massive entrance. Minutes passed as Gary waited, focusing on his breathing. Then he felt rather than heard a deep vibration, the ancestral tone that signaled the start of the ceremony. The massive doors slowly swung open, revealing the arena beyond. The sight took his breath away. The arena floor was a perfect circle of polished stone that seemed to glow from within. Above, the twin suns of the Kalshivar system cast golden light through sections of the ceiling left open to space. Force fields held the atmosphere in while allowing the spectacular view. Surrounding the arena floor were rising tiers of seats, filled with beings of every imaginable shape, size, and color. Some floated in containment fields designed for species that required different atmospheric conditions. Others were so large they occupied entire sections meant for dozens. Gary stepped forward, walking steadily toward the center circle. From the opposite side of the arena, Zelfar emerged. The Zarkonian champion had exchanged his previous clothing for formal battle armor that gleamed in the sunlight. Each of his 4 arms bore ceremonial bracers, and his scales had shifted to a deep crimson color that signaled readiness for combat. They reached the center circle at the same time. Close up, Zelfar seemed even taller than before, towering nearly 3 feet above Gary. A platform descended from the ceiling, carrying Arbiter Velna and 7 other beings, the High Council representatives. The platform stopped 10 feet above the arena floor. Honored guests, Velna's voice projected throughout the arena. Today we witness a trial of skill between the champion of the Zarkonian Empire, guardian of the 12 systems, Zelfar, and the first champion of Earth, Gary Mitchell. The crowd roared. The Arbiter nodded and raised both hands. Champions, take your positions. Gary and Zelfar moved to opposite sides of the central circle. The polished stone beneath their feet began to glow more intensely, creating a perfect ring of light between them. When the resonance tone sounds, the duel will begin, announced the Arbiter. May skill and honor guide your blades. The massive arena fell completely silent. Gary could hear his own heartbeat, steady and calm. Across from him, Zelfar had drawn all 4 of his energy blades. Each weapon hummed with power, creating a quartet of different tones. The Zarkonian spread his arms in a traditional opening stance, his 4 eyes fixed on Gary with predatory focus. Gary stood perfectly still, his sword still sheathed at his side. His hands hung loosely by his sides, his posture relaxed but alert. A murmur of confusion spread through the crowd. Many spectators leaned forward, wondering if the human had frozen in fear or misunderstood the upcoming signal. The resonance tone rang out, a deep, vibrating note that seemed to come from the arena itself. The stone beneath their feet pulsed once with light. Zelfar moved immediately, his 4 arms becoming a blur of motion. He covered the distance between them with incredible speed, energy blades creating patterns of light as they cut through the air. His attack was a masterpiece of coordination, each arm moving independently, striking at different heights and angles. Gary didn't move. He stood perfectly still, eyes closed, sword still sheathed, seeming oblivious to the deadly attack rushing toward him. The crowd gasped collectively. Even the council members leaned forward in alarm. Master Hiroshi remained motionless, watching without expression. Just before HFY's blades would have made contact, the alien champion suddenly halted his attack. All four arms froze in mid-strike, the energy blades stopping mere inches from Gary's body. A look of confusion passed over HFY's face, all four eyes blinking in sequence. "Draw your weapon," he demanded. Gary opened his eyes but remained motionless. "Attack if you wish." The crowd whispered in confusion. This was unlike any duel they had witnessed before. HFY's scales rippled with color, showing his growing frustration. He stepped back, then launched a new attack, more aggressive and less controlled than before. This time, Gary moved. A single step to the side, so precise and minimal that many observers missed it entirely. HFY's blades cut through empty air. Again and again, HFY attacked. Each time, Gary made the smallest possible movement to avoid the strikes. He never raised his hands to his sword, never took a defensive stance, simply moved with quiet efficiency, always at the last possible moment. 10 minutes passed this way. HFY's attacks grew increasingly wild and frustrated. His breathing became labored, while Gary showed no signs of fatigue. "Fight me properly," HFY roared, his composure cracking. "Draw your weapon. Face me with honor." Gary spoke just loudly enough for HFY and the nearest spectators to hear. "I am fighting. You just haven't noticed yet." HFY growled and gathered himself for one final, overwhelming assault. He spun into motion, all four blades creating a deadly web of energy that no opponent had ever survived. This time, Gary's hand moved to his sword. The crowd leaned forward in anticipation. But instead of drawing the blade, Gary simply adjusted its position slightly at his waist. Then, as HFY's attack reached him, Gary turned his body at precisely the right angle. The Zarkonian's momentum carried him forward, and in that moment, Gary moved, one hand touching HFY's upper right arm with the lightest contact, redirecting the alien's own force. HFY stumbled forward, off balance for the first time in the match. He recovered quickly and spun around, all four eyes wide with shock. "What manner of fighting is this?" he demanded. "You refuse to attack." Gary finally placed his hand on the hilt of his sword. "I have been attacking from the beginning. Now I will draw my blade." The crowd fell completely silent as Gary's hand tightened on his katana. Gary stood calmly, his hand resting on the hilt of his still sheathed katana. The crowd watched in complete silence, thousands of beings holding their breath. Even the council members leaned forward in their seats, captivated by this unexpected turn of events. HFY had regained his balance and now circled Gary cautiously. The Zarkonian champion's scales had shifted to a deep purple, a color that signaled intense concentration among his species. His four arms remained spread wide, energy blades humming with power. "You have avoided my attacks with unusual skill," HFY admitted. "But avoidance is not victory. You must strike to win." Gary nodded slightly. "You're right." For the first time since the duel began, Gary shifted into a formal stance. The celebration aboard the Endeavour lasted well into the ship's night cycle. Crew members who had watched the duel on transmission screens gathered in the main hall, replaying the incredible moment when Gary had drawn his sword so quickly that most viewers had missed it entirely. Captain Wilson had ordered special rations released for the occasion, and the mood was one of pride and accomplishment. Gary, however, slipped away early from the festivities. He changed out of his formal clothing and into simple training attire, then made his way to the now empty cargo bay where he had practiced during the journey. The space was quiet, with only the soft hum of the ship's engines in the background. He began his usual training routine, moving through the basic forms with the same careful attention he always gave them. The victory had not changed his approach to his art. "Even after such an achievement, you return to basics," said a voice from the doorway. Gary turned to see HFY standing there. The Zarkonian champion had changed out of his ceremonial armor into simpler clothing. Without the imposing battle gear, he looked less intimidating, though still impressive with his height and 4 arms. The basics are what saved me today, Gary replied, bowing slightly to his former opponent. Zelfar entered the training area, his movement graceful despite his size. The Federation Council is finalizing Earth's membership documents. Your planet will have full trading privileges by the end of the standard week. That's good news, Gary said, sheathing his sword. I have been studying your species since our match concluded, Zelfar continued. Humans are unexpected. Your physical capabilities are not remarkable. You lack natural weapons or defenses. Yet somehow you developed a fighting style that defeated techniques my people have perfected over thousands of years. Gary smiled. We had to become clever to survive on our world. When you can't overpower something, you learn to outsmart it. Zelfar's scales shifted to a thoughtful blue color. The council was most impressed by your restraint. You could have drawn blood and claimed victory in the traditional way. Victory wasn't my goal, Gary explained. Understanding was. Understanding. Zelfar seemed confused. By the end of our match, I wanted you to understand humanity. A bloody victory would have taught you only that we can be violent, like many species, but showing restraint and precision taught you something else about us. The Zarkonian was silent for a moment, all 4 eyes focused on Gary. You are correct. It taught us that humans might bring something new to the Federation. Something we need. Gary picked up a water bottle and took a drink. Will you return to your homeworld now? Actually, Zelfar said, his tone changing slightly, I have requested permission from my government to travel to Earth as part of the first cultural exchange. If you are willing, I would like to learn more about your fighting techniques. Gary looked surprised. You want to learn from me. In 12,000 cycles, no one has ever defeated me, Zelfar said again. I would be a fool not to learn from such a teacher. Master Hiroshi entered the cargo bay, moving slowly but with dignity. The best students are those who recognize how much they have to learn, he said, nodding to Zelfar. Gary would be honored to teach you, as would I. The next morning, as the Endeavor prepared to return to Earth, Gary stood at the observation deck one last time. Cal Shivar was now just a distant golden ring against the blackness of space. Lieutenant Olivia joined him at the window. The communications officer says Earth is going crazy with the news, she told him. You're going to be quite famous when we get home. Gary smiled. Fame wasn't part of the plan. What happens now? She asked. Now the real work begins, he replied. We've earned our place in the galaxy. Next, we have to prove we deserve it. Behind them, in another part of the cargo bay converted into a training area, Zelfar was already learning the basic forms from Master Hiroshi. The Zarkonian moved carefully, trying to coordinate his 4 arms to perform the simple human movements. It seems so inefficient, Zelfar complained. Surely I could strike faster using all my arms at once. Patience, Hiroshi instructed. Before you can master the sword, you must master yourself. This is the human way. Gary turned from the window and smiled. Earth's journey into the wider galaxy had begun, and it had started not with conquest or technology, but with something uniquely human, the perfect balance of strength and wisdom.